I had this mask I was going to wear today. Couldn't find it. It's a great mask. It's an old Zorro mask that my son wore for Halloween several years ago, and I grew kind of partial to it. It looks great on me. Can't find it, but I do have this cape, which is very comfortable and kind of striking in its own way, but it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't help me parachute. It can't help me glide over buildings, and it's not bulletproof, so it's essentially useless. It's an adornment and probably will get me killed in the long run, but in the short run, I want to talk about Watchmen, obviously, because I'm talking about capes and masks. And I saw this movie last night, and I've been anticipating it for a long time because I'm a fan of the original graphic novel written by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, which, as we all know, is a classic, groundbreaking, etc., 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 which is true. It's just been said so much it doesn't have to be said anymore. Like I said, I was looking forward to this because of my fascination, which I've written about many times on my blog, with masks and secret identities and punishing those who prey on the weak and the undefended, which comes from a personal experience of mine. If you read the link, if you're at my blog and you read the link beneath this video, you'll see what I'm talking about. I published this, I guess, less than a year ago, but if you haven't read it, you'll see where I'm coming from on the mask and cape issue. But as far as Watchmen is concerned, you know, I liked it. I was predisposed to like it. I'm a big fan of the book, and I know the characters, and I know the story. If anything, I was just looking at what was cut, what was changed, what was channeled a different way. And for the most part, I had no problem with it, because I think if you were to film a real Watchmen movie, it would be like Berlin Alexander plots or something. It would take hours and hours and hours. And Zack Snyder, the director, had to cram this into 2 hours and 43 minutes, which a lot of critics say is too long and that it dragged and whatnot, but it's only a kernel of what Watchmen is about. And essentially what Zack Snyder did was a primer on Watchmen, sort of a Cliff Notes version of Watchmen. So if you're not familiar with the characters, hopefully you'll get into the story and the storyline, which he more or less keeps to. In fact, in a lot of ways, as some critics have carped, Snyder has been incredibly faithful, was incredibly faithful to the graphic novel. Some scenes are right out of the graphic novel, and a lot of the dialogue is Alan Moore's, even though he doesn't get a writing credit, didn't want anything to do with this movie, as we know. A lot of the scenes are written by him verbatim, so that gives this version of Watchmen a lot of weight and the darkness that it needs to succeed. What one thinks about superhero genre or the idea of masked identities, I suppose, depends on one's personal views about crime and about social relations and just violence in general. Generally speaking, it's liberals and some leftists who have a real problem with these movies because they see them as fascistic and misogynistic and racist and the litany they throw at these things. And in a lot of cases, those critiques, I think, are accurate. It doesn't diminish my interest in the genre and in some of these efforts, but I think a lot of it's true. But again, if you're dealing with people who dress up in capes and masks and take on secret identities and go out and punish criminals physically, sometimes killing them, you're not talking about Earth People's Park in the 1960s. You're talking about sociopathic behavior, antisocial behavior. So, in that sense, the liberals and the leftists have a good critique. On the other hand, I always find this genre very primal. And again, maybe this is just based on my own experience going through life and identifying with this form, but there's something primal about people wanting justice, wanting equality, wanting to be protected against those who would take advantage of them, those who have more power and use violence against them. I think that's an interesting narrative that a lot of these movies do not go into. The Dark Knight did to a certain degree. Watchmen, in book form, really went into it. The movie touches on it. If you know the book, you bring that to the movie, so it perhaps fleshes it out more for you. I think for a lot of critics, especially those like Anthony Lane at The New Yorker and A.O. Scott at The New York Times, I don't know if they read the book before. Maybe they did. I don't remember if they said that in the reviews. But they clearly are not fans of this kind of movie, and threw all of the requisite epithets at it, with A.O. Scott ending his review saying that the lesson of Watchmen is finding an appropriate, what's the word, an appropriate healing sense of violence, something that is preferable to individualistic violence. And that was the lesson of Watchmen. Well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it, but I find it interesting that A.O. Scott, who works for the New York Times, is so condemning of fictional violence when the paper he works for endorses real-world violence and has much more blood on its hands than Zack Snyder or Alan Moore, for that matter. Not to say that A.O. Scott supports the editorial policy of the New York Times. I don't know if he does or not. I don't think he's ever come out against it in print, and I doubt the New York Times would be tolerant of such dissent within their ranks. But also note that people like Judith Miller and Thomas Friedman, among many others, have written for the Times supporting the kind of violence, and worse, far worse violence, than what A.O. Scott decries in this movie. So I find this yet another diversion by certain liberals away from the real target, which in this case would be the New York Times, onto a comic book movie. Now, the violence is very disturbing, in a lot of cases quite graphic, but that is part of the narrative. And that, I think, is what Alan Moore was getting across, that people who do this at night, wearing these costumes, do not do it gently. They punish people, sometimes killing them and maiming them. And this movie really reinforces that alternate reality. So that's all I got to say about it. I'm an unmasked geek who liked Watchmen.